There's a well-known chess anecdote which runs as follows. Back at the 1953 Zurich Candidates Tournament, very famous event, Najdorf was playing the famous Russian theoretician Boleslavsky. And apparently Najdorf wanted a rest day or something like that. So, you know, after a few moves, he asked Boleslavsky, and Najdorf was slightly better at the time, "Are you playing for a draw?" Well, Boleslavsky looked up and said, "No." So the game went on. And a few minutes later, Najdorf, again wanting the draw, basically said, "Well, are you playing for a win then?" Because he was amazed that Boleslavsky could play for a win from the position on the board. Boleslavsky again said, "No." So by this stage, Najdorf, wanting the draw, was getting a bit exasperated. We said, "Well, what are you playing for then?" And Boleslavsky said, "Well, I'm playing because I like my position." Now, why do I tell this anecdote? Well, somebody asked in the commentary room yesterday how you would sum up Keith Arkell's style. And I found that a very difficult question to answer. But this game perhaps will go some distance to answering that question, as does the anecdote, in the sense that Keith Arkell just loves playing chess. And he's an absolute genius in forcing the opponent into playing the types of positions they don't normally play. I mean, anybody can trot out opening theory, or even have some grasp of the different middle games that arise from their favourite openings. But Arkell seems to play insipid openings, yet he manages to win games with what looks like ease, because he's able to force the opponent to play positions they don't normally play. So my game of the day from round 6 is the game between Keith Arkell, white, against Arkell P Asenov, playing black. A young, very talented player, very sharp player. But here he's forced to play an endgame, which perhaps is Arkell's strength and not quite Asenov's strongest point. So the opening in this game, really, from Arkell is completely insipid. I mean, it's absolutely nothing. It's a variation of the Queen's Indian. Not necessarily this position, the Petrosian variation. And black plays knight takes d5. This is absolutely the main line. And we thought in the commentary room this was a good choice by black because it's avoiding fixed pawn formations in the centre. I've noticed that Keith is a lot more comfortable with fixed pawn formations, after which he can start manoeuvring with his pieces. But knight takes d5 is more fluid. And then by far the most common move for white here is e3. Queen c2 is also a strong candidate move. But Arkell plays bishop g5. And just seems very content to let black exchange the pieces. So off come the pieces. And frankly, after, 11 moves, 12 moves, we reach a position where black has equalised easily. Yet this is precisely where Arkell starts to play. Now, over the next few moves, again, we see Asenov playing very well. He centralises his rooks. Keith just contents himself with improving the position of his pieces. He gives a check, useful in the sense it nudges the king into the corner, which could be handy in an endgame. The king is further away from the centre. And now white just plays bishop e4. So very, very quiet play by white, and it almost looks as if white is playing for a draw, because after a subsequent knight a5 by black, yet more pieces will be exchanged. So Asenov plays king g8, asking Arkell what he's doing, and white starts to make a little bit of headway on the queen side. Black indeed does go through with exchanging, knight to a5, and another pair of pieces comes off the board. So what have we got here? Well, we've got basically an equal endgame, and I'm sure between two very strong players, a quick handshake will be the order of the day. But as I say, this is where Keith Arkell's strength really kicks in. He's an extremely good technician. He has, over the course of decades, played endgame after endgame out to its absolute conclusion. A bit like Ulf Andersson in that regard, just loves playing chess. And the opponent has a sickening feeling in his stomach that Arkell's never going to give him a draw. He's actually played this out to the death. So, having said that, of course, black is absolutely fine in this position. In fact, I slightly prefer black's position here because of the open c file. So white just improves his position slightly. That's what you should do in this sort of situation. Just h3, giving his king a bit of luft, and black plays rook to c3. What can white hope for? Well, he's got two things going for him. Number one, he's got one pawn on the queen side, freezing two black pawns. I mean, I suppose what black would like to do in this endgame is to create a passed pawn on the queen side. But that's not going to be so easy. White's also got a central pawn majority. So white is looking to play e4 and d5 at some point. However, even if he establishes a passed pawn in the centre, it's not going to be easy to push it all the way down the board because black's pieces are very active. Meanwhile, black for his part has control of the c-file, fairly active pieces, and currently control of the light squares. And this control really should mean that black is able to draw this position in relative comfort. So again, for the time being, Asenov plays excellent moves. Just doubling up on the c-file and then queen to d5. If we're splitting hairs, maybe he could have considered rook 3 c7, and if knight e5, queen e4. I mean, this could have been another way with the intention of playing rook c2. Takes, queen takes. Black's in no danger yet again, and is fairly active. But queen d5 is okay. Arkell plays queen to b5, and perhaps now this is a position where Asenov could have considered playing queen to e4, keeping his queen active and again claiming rough equality. Queen takes b5 should still be equal, but once again we see now this pawn on b5 freezing the two black pawns. With the queens off, it's easier for white to think about getting that passed ball in the centre. But anyway, black is still okay, so he brings his knight into c4. Up comes the rook to b4, and black drops his knight back to d6, monitoring the pawn on b5. So white's got to be very careful that he keeps that pawn protected, or engineers a situation where the pawn doesn't need to be protected. The knight on d6 is very well placed. White retreats. And now black plays the very tempting move, rook to c2. Well, was this the moment for f6? Computers tend to think that this is a good move for black. Lets the king out, and if d5, we go e5. If rook a1, which is probably white's best move according to the machines, knight takes b5, and now knight to h4. White sacrifices the b pawn in order to get his knight into a good square. And if a5 now, the knight comes into f5 with compensation. Well, maybe this was a way for black. I mean, I'm not sure what Keith would have done after f6. I doubt he would have gone d5. But I think black is perfectly okay here. He's getting ready to bring his king in. But again, we can see why black plays rook to c2, getting his rook active. d5. Well, I think black's got to take that. Rook takes d5. So white's position has improved over the last couple of moves. He's got his rook active, and the rook on d5 can look forward to activating itself further with rook to d7. All the same, this position is still balanced. So in comes black's knight, hitting f2. Knight to d4. Well, as I said, Keith is an absolute genius at putting his pieces on the best available squares in endgames of this type. And knight d4 is an interesting move because it's now forcing Asenov to calculate in a simplified situation. After some time he plays rook c1 check, again forcing exchanges. Could he have played rook takes f2? This is the question. Well, the machines tend to think that he can. It's all based on rook e5 and now knight c3. King takes f2, knight b1, and perhaps the move that Asenov saw in his calculations and didn't like was rook e7, with the idea of rook a8, rook b7, and white is tying black up. But I don't think it can be too difficult for black to make a draw in this position. Black's going to lose his a pawn, but at the same time he can get his knight to an active square. For instance, if he goes knight d2, which I think is a good move, in comes the white knight to chop the pawn off. Knight comes back to d6, very good. And now I think white's forced to take on a7. And we reach a situation here where it's a probable draw. Now, perhaps black's a little bit better, but I would bank on Keith being able to draw this fairly comfortably. He's better because the knight on a7 is a little bit offside, but nevertheless, nevertheless this should be a drawable. So that is how close Asenov comes to a draw at this current moment. Rook c1, okay, off come the rooks again, and black takes on f2. Very tempting, but this does allow white to activate his rook and fork the pawns on f7 and a7. And now we get a very sharp situation occurring, which, you know, if you thought this was going to be a quiet ending, you're wrong. Black has got to calculate this properly in order to make a draw here. He goes knight d1. Keith takes on f7 and then takes on a7. And now we're reaching the position where black makes his fatal mistake. Well, perhaps not immediately, as he attacks the knight. The knight moves. Now comes the fatal moment. And it just goes to show how much in simplified positions, you know, you have to be really accurate. Rook to b1. Very tempting, going after the pawn on b5, which is really white's main winning trump. Or so it seems. What should black play? Well, he should bring his king out. And after knight takes g7, rook d2, king g3, and maybe even rook b2 here. Obviously you can take on g2 with the knight, but as I say, the b5 pawn is public enemy number one. I think if Asenov had played this way, he would have drawn this quite comfortably. As it is, the pressure of playing Arkell tells rook b1, and now after rook takes g7 check, it's a whole new ball game. As although black gets the pawn on b5, unfortunately his king is in a terrible mess. Now if we just drop back, can black improve? Well, he could try rook b2. I think white would take that pawn. King g8, knight f4, rook takes b5, rook d6. He could try this. It's not as bad as the game for black, but, well, you would bet your house on Keith being able to convert this advantage in due course. All the same, black's got a passed pawn. He might have some remote chance to draw this, but as I say, it is only remote. Going back, we can't blame black for taking that pawn. Rook takes h6 check. But from now on, what looks like a difficult situation is made to look remarkably easy by white's super accurate play. And he starts by pushing his pawn. Rook b3, rook f6. Who would believe that the black king in this very simple situation is being forced into a mating net? Yes, it's true. White's going to march that pawn up to g6 and then go rook f8, checkmate. And there's not a great deal that actually black can do about it. Asenov moved his knight to c3, pawn came up to g6, and all black can do now is to give checks. The checks end, mate cannot be prevented. So Asenov resigned. Well, that's my game of the day because, you know, I can see a lot of people looking at a game and thinking, well, how does Arkell do it? And this is why he's such a unique player, because he's able to win in situations where most other players would give up the ghost as equal. He kept the game going here. He managed to put Asenov under tremendous pressure. He compelled him to play accurately, and when the accurate moves stopped, he stepped in and took the point. So, in many ways, that makes him a unique player, and I hope you enjoyed this example of his play.